This is a LibraryVox recording. All LibraryVox recordings are license-free and in the public domain. For further information and to learn how to contribute to this project, please visit LibraryVox. Concerning the Black Lake by Karl-Wilhelm Sali zu Contessa, a Night Piece. Chapter 1. The forester Wilbrand sat with his family at the evening meal. The storm strode mightily, rustling through the oaks outside. Inside the chamber, however, things were quiet and still. Wilbrand had rested his head on his arm and stared gloomily ahead. Frau Gertrude, from time to time, cast a tear-heavy glance at the pale and distraught face of her husband and sighed. Finally, she dared, reached her hand across the table to him and spoke with a trembling voice. "Where were you again so long, Traugott?" Wilbrand started up as if from a bad dream and turned away from her. "What's the point of asking?" he replied darkly after a while. "I was in the city." "And have you concluded your business?" Frau Gertrude continued. He let out a grim laugh. "Business, yes, business, a bad business. Just pray diligently that it doesn't come to a conclusion." He jumped up, the others rose likewise. Elizabeth, the daughter, wanted to say the prayer according to custom, but Wilbrand cried, "Leave the praying, I have no use for it right now. Whoever deals with humans gets cheated. I'd like to try it with the devil for once." Frau Gertrude crept weeping to her chamber. Elizabeth, however, folded her hands over her breast and looked at her father, serious and firm, so that he could not bear it, but turned around and took a rifle from the wall, busying himself with it to hide his embarrassment. Elizabeth motioned to the two young hunters to leave. Then she went to the chamber and asked Gertrude to speak with the father now, for now, she said, was the right moment, which might not come again soon. Gertrude approached Wilbrand and gently laid her hand on his shoulder. Wilbrand seemed not to notice it. He fiddled with the rifle lock. "Do you have no friendly glance left for me at all?" Gertrude finally asked softly and quietly. "Haven't I borne joy and sorrow with you for 19 years? Why do you now turn your heart away from me? You are not on a good path, Traugott. Turn back while there is still time. Trust me more. I have surely known good advice otherwise. Perhaps I can help you now, too. Do you have money?" Wilbrand burst out without looking around. "Money, money, lots of money. Only that can help me." "I don't recognize you anymore," Gertrude replied. "Much money has never been your aim otherwise. But since the strange hunter was here on St. John's Eve and spoke of the hidden treasures here in the mountains, since then you are completely changed. And from day to day it gets worse with you. No rest anywhere, no peace anywhere, as if a bad conscience drives you. It is not a good sign, Traugott, when one no longer likes it at home." Wilbrand hung the rifle on the nail and paced the room with large strides. "Worse and worse it gets," he finally began. "Yes, you are probably right. The path goes down a steep mountain to hell. Whoever once sets his foot upon it, he must, even against his will, go further and further. From pressure to gambling, from gambling to fraud, from fraud to stealing, from stealing. Well, what remains then? To robbery, to murder. It's only a few steps. Ever faster the fall goes down. No tree, no bush I could hold on to. Onward, to the devil. Hurry so that it comes to an end." He threw himself onto the grandfather chair by which he was standing and laid his head on its armrest. Gertrude stood before him, wringing her hands. For a terrible premonition lay upon her soul like a dark abyss into which she looked down shuddering. Then, outside in the forest, a clear hunter's call was heard 3 times in succession. The dogs in the yard started barking. The hound lying under the table rose, growling. There was a heavy knock on the gate. "Who can that be so late?" Gertrude said anxiously and hurried to the window. The gate was opened. In the twilight, she distinguished a tall male figure striding across the yard towards the house. "God help us," she cried out. "That is the strange hunter. See how the dogs cringe before him. He brings us new misfortune into the house again." Wilbrand lifted his head and spoke. "You do him wrong, Gertrude. That is a brave fellow, even if not so friendly in appearance by God's grace. If I had listened to him, things would not have come this far with me." He stood up to open the house door for the guest, welcomed him kindly, led him into the chamber, and ordered his wife to provide refreshment and comfort for the worthy visitor. Gertrude obeyed with a heavy heart. The stranger was silent for a long time, casting searching glances around from his dark eyes. Silently, Gertrude went about serving the guest, and occasionally Wilbrand too remained silent and seemed to wrestle with himself over an important decision. Finally, the former began, "Where is your little daughter, Frau Gertrude? When I was last with you, I was not fortunate enough to see her. It seems to me as if her sight will not be granted to me today either. Nevertheless, I will no longer conceal from you. It is actually she who has led me to you." As Gertrude looked at him, astonished and almost frightened by these words, Elizabeth entered from the chamber. The stranger rose to go towards her, but as if struck by the girl's appearance, he interrupted his steps and stared at her silently. Elizabeth lowered her gaze furiously to the ground in girlish confusion. However, she soon raised her large blue eyes again and looked seriously and questioningly into the dark countenance of the man standing before her. A faint smile flew over it, like dawn over a stormy night. He stepped closer and spoke. "Forgive me if, in gazing upon you, I forgot my greeting. I hope to make amends by bringing you now, along with mine, another from an old friend. It concerns you likewise." He turned towards Wilbrand and his wife, for it is from Captain Leuthold, the head forester Leuthold's son. Elizabeth stepped forward with joyfully shining glances. Wilbrand cried out as if waking from a dream, "From Leuthold, from my dear hunter, then be doubly welcome. We almost thought him dead already." "Did you say Captain Leuthold?" asked Gertrude and folded her hands. "Yes, so I said," replied the stranger, "for he is." "So tell us how he came to such honors," Gertrude continued. "It seems to me as if you speak of my son, and truly I may almost call him so rightly, for after his mother's death, he was more and dearer at home with us than with his father, until the eternal discord with the latter finally drove him away. It is now exactly 4 years. The stranger now briefly recounted various things from Leuthold's life, how he had then taken service with the Swedes who were stationed in Poland, how fortune had been particularly kind to him, that a colonel had grown fond of him, and King Karl himself had finally noticed and distinguished him in the battle near Klissow, how he had rendered the narrator a highly important service, and this had become the basis of their acquaintance. How then, in all their conversations, he had always remembered his homeland with great love and longed to return there once more, and how, finally, on the journey to this region, he had made him promise to seek out the old friends and bring his dear childhood playmate Elizabeth a sign of his still joyfully and longingly enduring remembrance. With this, he presented the deeply blushing girl with a beautiful ring and asked to be allowed to place it on her finger himself. Elizabeth looked at her mother. Frau Gertrude nodded kindly in affirmation. The stranger seized the girl's hand with great haste. As she looked him in the face over it, she felt almost uncanny, for a strangely triumphant smile twitched around his mouth, and from his deep-set eyes it shot like 2 dark flames. The ring burned on her finger as if it were glowing. She would have gladly taken it off again, but she dared not. Wilbrand, as well as his wife, noticed nothing of her unease, for their hearts had opened up at the memory of their favorite, and there was no end to the back-and-forth, questioning and telling. The forester ordered the last long-saved bottle of wine to be brought from the cellar, but the guest did not allow it, fetching instead from his hunting bag a large flask full of fiery Hungarian wine. He poured the glasses full and encouraged them to drink. Wilbrand complied diligently. The noble juice of the vine seemed easily to wash away every care from his heart, to lift every heavy consciousness from his soul. He became livelier with every glass and began to bring up all sorts of pranks and merry hunters' tales. The stranger soon steered the conversation to the mountains at whose foot Wilbrand's dwelling stood, to their wonderful nature, and the legends that still circulated among the people about them. Here Wilbrand also knew many things to tell. The other listened with great attention, but suddenly the former stopped in his speech, stared fixedly ahead, and a dark shadow passed over his features, which had been joyfully animated by wine and conversation. "What is wrong with you?" cried the guest. "Are you afraid of your own words? Speak on. I take great pleasure in such things. The more gruesome, the better." With these words he refilled his glass. Wilbrand seized it hastily and emptied it in one gulp. "Well, yes," he cried, "you are probably right. I am a fool and am afraid of my own words. They are, of course, only words. It is a conversation over a glass of wine. It is here in the room inside that we speak. But outside at night time, when the herbs, forest, and mountain stream add their eerie voices, or perhaps even by the lake over there in the mountains, when the dark waves lap so eerily against the shore, and the rocks all around echo back every soft word manifold, as if they wanted to report it to the water-fay who dwells down there in the deep black water, then I certainly wouldn't advise you such conversations, dear sir. Believe me, I can tell you, there is something dreadful about such talk, and easily you weave from your own words a net around your head that drags you down to hell. Just as you mention the mountain lake, cried the other, there I won't let you go, for my mind is set on that above all. Wilbrand, however, seemed not to hear him. He had propped his arms on the table and covered his face with both hands. Then Frau Gertrude took the floor and told the guest how, not far from here, but deep in the mountains, lay a lake, almost entirely surrounded by mighty high, rugged cliffs, apparently of completely black color, although the water was bright and clear, and whose depth no man had been able to fathom. Of this lake the story went that a witch or water-fay carried on her existence therein and guarded the treasures lying at the bottom. Many she had already lured to herself, who then disappeared forever. She would leave the truth or untruth of it undecided. But this much was certain, that often in calm weather the lake began to roar and churn, one knew not whence nor why. Often under a clear sky, dense clouds suddenly rose from its surface, from which then a dreadful thunderstorm with thunder, lightning, storm, and hail broke over the surrounding valleys, and perhaps such a play of nature had generally laid the foundation for that legend. Yes, just explain everything away naturally, spoke Wilbrand in a dull voice. You heard that from the clever fellow over there. Just keep explaining and call lies and fairy tales which you cannot comprehend. If you had stood by the lake at midnight like me, if you had done as I did, sending 3 little stones and 3 words down into the water, and had seen how it began to boil and roar, and the wondrous misty figures rise up from it, and how the water-fay. Give me another glass of your wine. I tell you, sir, it is no fairy tale. I have seen the water figure sitting right in the middle of the lake. I heard her voice through storm and thunder. Just yesterday, last night, sir, if your wine were not potent within me, I would have to freeze with horror even now as I tell such things. He drained his glass and confidentially pressed the stranger, who freshly refilled it. Gertrude looked anxiously at her husband and then at her daughter. Elizabeth listened with rapt attention. Now, Wilbrand began anew. It is said that in ancient times there was a duke or prince of this region, to whom the water-fay gave herself in love, and with whom he maintained such intimate relations for many years. When he finally began to grow old and gray, it happened that his own sons, who coveted the rule, waged war against him, defeated his army in a great field battle, and when he escaped with barely his life on a fugitive steed, they put a price on their father's head and besieged him in his castle. When the old prince realized that even the few who still held out with him would soon fall away from him and betray him, he summoned his servants and slaves one night with all his treasures, pretending that he had made a treaty with his youngest son, and moved with them through an underground passage that opened into the mountains, in all silence, out of the castle straight to the Black Lake. And when all the servants had descended at his command into the rocky valley, the water began to rise mightily. It overflowed its banks furiously and swallowed all the servants together with all the treasures they carried. The old prince, however, having thus secured his possessions, bade farewell to life and threw himself from the cliff on which he stood, likewise down into the lake, into the arms of his beloved, who prepared a resting place for him in the dark depths. There she now sits, for more than 1,000 years, guarding the grave of her beloved and his treasures. But if someone comes who has made himself free and detached from everything that binds his heart and hand on earth, and devotes himself entirely to her service, and as a sign thereof, throws a golden finger ring, which the priest placed on his hand before the altar, down into the lake at midnight. Then she will again be willing to serve him in everything he desires and give him free power to dispose of her treasures. The stranger, who had listened to Wilbrand's narrative with the greatest tension and noticeable restlessness, now jumped up, his eyes aflame. At midnight, he cried, "How far is it from here to the lake?" "About 2 hours," replied Wilbrand, "if you are good on foot." "Well then," the other continued, "I ask you to describe the path I should take from here." Wilbrand stared up at him, dismayed and frightened, clasped his hands together and cried, "What, you don't mean to? You don't want to go now at this hour?" "Indeed I do," spoke the stranger, "and now at this hour. Now I am in just the right mood for such an adventure. Describe the way quickly. I must get to know the water maiden." Wilbrand jumped up likewise and cried, grasping the stranger by the arm, "I advise you well, sir, desist. You will never accomplish it. The treasures over there are not waiting for you." The stranger looked at him and laughed full of grimness. "Don't trouble yourself," he said. My will is forged in a good smithy. I want to and must overcome it, and today, if you won't show me the way, well, then I shall find it alone. Fare you well." With these words, he reached for his hunting bag and his weapon and turned to leave. Wilbrand, however, sprang to the door, blocking his path. His face glowed with wine and anger, his eyes rolled terribly, his lips trembled. "Stop, I swear to you, not from this spot, I won't let you." The other stood calmly before him and looked at him for a while. "What are you starting?" he finally began. "You cannot lift the treasure anyway. Your heart and hand are bound. You have a wife and child." Wilbrand cast his eyes to the ground and spoke dully. "That is not your concern. No knot is so tight it cannot be untied or cut. Who can know? Even tomorrow doesn't know what the evening holds in store. The water-fay is my bride. I will not tolerate you desiring her." Then the stranger suddenly seized him with a powerful arm, hurled him far away from the door, and strode slowly out. Wilbrand stood for a moment without moving, then rushed furiously to the wall where the hunting gear hung, tore down a rifle, and wanted to follow him. But, crying out loudly, Gertrude and Elizabeth threw themselves in his way and held him back by force. "Let me go," he screamed. "I must go after him. It's about his life or mine." Finally, the voice of the stranger was heard, ordering the young hunter to open the gate. "Let me go," Wilbrand screamed once more, "or it will first be about your lives. You are the ones who stand between me and my fortune anyway. You must go." Then Gertrude let her arms sink, turned away and covered her face. Elizabeth, however, threw herself down before her father and embraced his knees, weeping even tighter. "Wilbrand, Wilbrand," cried Gertrude in utmost pain. "Has it come to this with you? Have I deserved this from you?" His gaze lowered to the tear-swimming face of his daughter, who looked imploringly up at him. He gently freed himself from her, lifted her up, and set her on a chair that stood nearby. No one spoke a word. There was a long silence. Finally, Wilbrand began to speak softly, as if to himself. "Where then? Show me where. Where is a way out?" And after a while, turning to his wife, "Get money," he continued. "Get money, otherwise we are all lost." The forester's wife quickly went to a wall cupboard, took out a neat little box, placed it on the table, and unlocked it. "It was saved for the utmost need," she said, weeping. "I thought never to use it. Take it and sell it. I will not ask further." Wilbrand cast a gloomy glance at the silver beaker and the crocheted gold and silver showpieces lying in the box. Elizabeth took her ring from her finger and silently placed it on top. "Even if this could only help, should you, Wilbrand?" He cried out suddenly and jumped up. "If only once more, just once more. Who knows, fortune has moods. Yes, once more I will try it. For the last time, just pray diligently. I will be back soon." With these words, he gathered everything together and put it in his pocket, but pushed back the ring which Elizabeth had added. "Where are you going, Wilbrand?" cried Gertrude. "To the city," he replied. "It is the last venture I make with fortune. Pray, pray for me and for yourselves. I will be back soon." He went out the door with quick steps. Those remaining watched him silently. Then Gertrude fell to her knees and raised eyes and hands to heaven in fervent prayer. Elizabeth knelt down likewise and prayed, and when she had finished, the daughter silently laid her head on her mother's breast, and both wept together. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of The Black Lake by Karl-Wilhelm Sali. Contessa. This Library Vox recording is in the public domain. The sky glowed in the west, the mountains cast long shadows before them. Elizabeth sat alone on a wooded hill to the side of the forester's lodge and looked out into the wide valley at the foot of the mountains, which the evening adorned with its purest lights. Wilbrand had been absent for several days and had sent no word. Her heart was full of worry and gloomy foreboding. The mountain shadows stretched longer, ever redder bloomed the peaks. From the nearest village, the peaceful sound of the evening bell floated up to her, and like the mild west wind that whispered softly past her, a quiet melancholy moved through her breast. Into the dull feeling of the present mingled the memory of a cheerful past. In fresh morning radiance, her childhood lay before her, her early deceased beloved brother and lute-hold. Her playmate waved lovingly to her, and as she thought of the latter, the image of the strange hunter who had brought her the ring surprisingly joined them. But they all stood far, far away. She could not grasp the kindly offered hands, and as her gaze turned back painfully to her present life, she felt indescribably lonely and abandoned. Across the gorge in which the forester's dwelling lay, a spot on the high peak caught her eye, marked far out by two hills piled high with stones. Here, according to legend, A mother and her daughter had died, who, separated by a thunderstorm in the mountains, after wandering for 3 days, finally found each other again at this spot, but were overtaken by death at the moment of their reunion. The survivors piled up the memorial hills from the surrounding stones, and even now no one passed by there without adding a stone. A song about this event, which Elizabeth had often sung in earlier days, stirred its melancholic sounds within her. She seemed to herself like the abandoned girl, and softly she began to sing, "Mother has left her child in the mountains far from home. The day already wants to fade, and the storm wind is rising. Mother, who will be with him when the wild night breaks? Oh, how it howls in the airs. Every stream becomes a torrent. Mountain voices from forest and gorges awaken with 1,000 terrors. Mother, mother, hear the wind howl. Don't you hear a poor child? Full of fear and bitter pains, the mother searches everywhere, over mountain and through vale, for 3 long days back and forth. And finds him nevermore. But as the 3rd day declines, mother, look to the mountain height. See what shows itself there, white as freshly fallen snow. Mother, there in the evening glow, shining stands your little daughter. Reunion's heavenly joy, separation's deep grief. Father, Father, let us both nevermore be parted. And God hears them without pain. Joy breaks both their hearts. Images shimmer in the evening ray, shining like the fresh snow, towering high, the death memorials on the dark mountain's height. If your path leads you past, lay a stone upon them too. She could not end the song without tears. In painful longing, she spread her arms out into the air and gladly would have embraced her beloved mother at this moment and died with her. Then there was a rustling in the bushes, and when she turned, she saw the tall figure of the strange hunter standing before her. Startled, she jumped up. Elizabeth, spoke the stranger gently and stepped closer to her. She wanted to flee. Elizabeth, he spoke again and even more gently. She looked at him. These were no longer the dark, stern features that had filled her with secret awe before him yesterday. The dark eyes looked so mild. His whole countenance was only a quiet, modest plea. She stood still, feeling her heart beat in violent motion. "Why do you want to flee me?" he began. "For 2 days now, the hope of seeing you has driven me restlessly around your dwelling. You have cast a spell on me, Elizabeth, and now you must see how you can get rid of me again." Elizabeth lowered her blushing eyes and spoke in a low voice. "Do you know anything of my father?" The stranger shook his head in denial. "Were you at the Black Lake?" she continued. He looked at her silently for a long time. Then he took her hand and said, "Can you forgive me for being a fool? Whoever has seen you may dare to claim he has a free heart. Yes, I was at the Black Lake. That very night I was with you. I had already thrown down 3 stones and called the water-fay. The water began to roar and boil, and already I had this finger ring in my hand to throw it down and vow myself to her eternal service. Then, at that moment, the blindfold of madness tore from my brow. It was as if an invisible hand pulled me back by the hair from the steep bank. And when I looked up, I saw your image amidst the gray mists rising from the lake. Yes, you were there in person, hovering above the hellish spectacle like a guardian angel. And then I felt it clearly and distinctly, how my heart, yes, from the very first moment I saw you, was no longer free, and felt with delight and with pain how the love that had secretly dwelt therein for so long now triumphantly made its entrance, driving out all earthly and unholy things from its dwelling. So I did not let myself be misled by all the illusions around me, and did not listen to what the eerie voices whispered and croaked from the gorges and rocks, but cried, "Depart from me, you power of hell. I have not surrendered myself to you, but to heaven. You have claimed no part in me." And so I hurried quickly down the mountain without looking around further. A greenish thunderstorm raged behind me. Left and right, the pine trunks crashed down beside me. Angrily overflowing their banks, the mountain waters threw themselves in my path. But the thoughts of you gave me superhuman strength, for God's hand was visibly upon me, so I came through. While he spoke thus, Elizabeth stood with great anxiety and confusion. She dared neither to look at him nor to withdraw her hand from his, and when he now fell silent, she was powerless to speak a word. "Yes, God's hand was upon me," he continued. "He did not want to leave his work unfinished. He took pity on my inner life and the danger to my soul. For Elizabeth, I stood on an abyss more terrible than that Black Lake, and behold, he sent me his saving angel visibly in the love for you. Do not push this love away from you. All my hope, here and hereafter, hangs on your word. Even during my first visit to your father, I saw you without you seeing me. The purity of your soul, the nobility of your spirit did not escape me, for my gaze reads in the human breast as in an open book, and they struck me wonderfully. Like lightning, the premonition struck me that my path hitherto was not the right one, that only united with you could I attain the highest that life offers. Once more, indeed. That night at your father's, evil triumphed over me, but for the last time. Here on this spot, I renounce from now on the dark impulses that have filled my mind until now, and I vow myself to heaven and to you. His voice had become loud and strong with the last words. Elizabeth raised her gaze to him, but before the ray of love that broke victoriously and powerfully from his eyes, she quickly lowered it again. And as she, trembling, withdrew her hand from his, the ring she wore on her finger caught her eye. Then suddenly the image of Leuthold, the trusted childhood playmate, stood before her, stretched out his hands pleadingly towards her and looked at her so melancholically from his blue eyes. Quickly she held the hand with the ring towards the stranger and cried, "Are you Leuthold's friend?" He fell silent for a moment, his face darkened. "Well, I notice," he spoke finally with bitterness, "what you mean by this question. Yes, I am his friend. He risked his life for me, and I am prepared at any moment to risk it again for him. But to renounce you, that I will never do. Only one word decides my fate, my life's happiness, my soul's salvation. He loves you. Well, I do too. No prior promise binds you to him. I know you are free. Even this ring does not speak for him. It speaks for me, Elizabeth. For it is my ring you wear, not from Leuthold," stammered Elizabeth. "No, not from him," he cried with a strong voice. "That was just a pretext, Elizabeth, which you must forgive, my love. From me you have the ring. With it I have consecrated you as my bride, you most glorious of your sex, and you belong to me. 3 days and 3 nights you have worn it. The secret power of the symbols you see engraved upon it has silently woven its invisible net around you. You can no longer escape. You are mine. You must be mine. And curse and perdition upon anyone who would try to snatch you from me." Elizabeth looked up at him. His cheeks, still reddened higher by the last evening ray, burned in dark glow. His eyes stood wildly blazing above them like 2 misfortune-announcing stars. She trembled in the innermost core of her being. And as he, at that moment, strode towards her to embrace her with his arm, she tore herself away from him with force and hurried in rapid flight down the mountain. She heard his pleading voice behind her. She heard his footsteps following her. But being more familiar with the path and favored by the falling dusk, she gained the light and reached the house, where she sank, pale and breathless, at her mother's feet. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of The Black Lake by Karl-Wilhelm Sali's Contessa. This Library Vox recording is in the public domain. It was the evening of the following day. Later, mother and daughter still sat together in the quiet chamber, waiting again in vain, it seemed, for Wilbrand's return. The conversation, which the anxious expectation pressing upon their breasts had long prevented from really starting, had now completely died down. One heard the candle on the table crackle. The pendulum of the wall clock counted out the moments for them with its hoarse voice, softly and deliberately, moments that would never return. "Still not," sighed Frau Gertrude finally, as the clock struck 11, "and Georg doesn't return either and bring any news." Elizabeth started at her mother's voice. She jumped up, closed the book lying before her, and looked around with distraught glances. Since yesterday's conversation with the stranger, all peace had deserted her. She felt utterly disturbed and torn within. Not without awe and secret dread could she think of the stranger, and yet his image would not leave her soul. Still, in the red evening glow, the tall figure stood before her. Still, she felt the dark glow of his eyes burning in her heart. Still, she heard his voice calling after her so pleadingly. And at the same time, she saw Leuthold's image in the distance, stretching his arms pleadingly towards her, with force. She wanted to turn away from the former, but she did not succeed. In vain, she fled to her prayer book, in which she had so often found comfort. This time, she could not gather her wildly wandering thoughts. No true devotion calmed her mind, no peace came to her breast, and with horror she had to remember the invisible net the stranger had mentioned, woven around her by the ring's secret powers from which there was no escape. "He's still not coming, Elizabeth," Gertrude repeated, as the clock again announced a past quarter hour. "Oh," cried Elizabeth hastily, "if only he had never come." Gertrude looked at her astonished and shook her head. "Of whom are you speaking, my child? Your thoughts are still with him. I meant your father." Elizabeth lowered her eyes. "Well, yes," she began after a while. "Who knows? I dread his return no less. A bad premonition weighs upon me. May God have mercy that it does not come true for us." both fell silent again. Meanwhile, an owl had settled on the garden wall outside the window and was screeching a very mournful tune. Gertrude looked at her daughter, but she seemed to hear nothing. She had fixed her eyes rigidly on one spot. Her lips moved as if she were speaking to herself. On her cheeks, flush and pallor alternated, so that Gertrude finally stood up and, taking her hand worriedly, sat down beside her. She did not notice. After a while, she began to speak softly and hastily. "The water is coming. It's coming ever closer. Do you see the wall of water? It's rolling down the gorge. Take the shining sword away. Throw it out into the water. I dread it. This is for you, mother. Whoa, there the wall of water crashes in. Everything in the lake. Save yourselves." She jumped up and wanted to pull her mother along with her. "Elizabeth, my child," the latter cried anxiously. "What are you doing? Collect yourself. You are with me. You are with your mother." Then she turned towards her mother and laid her hand on her forehead. "Where am I then?" She spoke, astonished. "I must have been sleeping and I dreamt. That was a strange dream, mother. Those were peculiar images. Feel how my heart is pounding." Just then Heinrich, the young hunter, came in. He brought the keys to the outer courtyard gate. "There must be something quite special going on in the mountains again tonight," he began. "I've been listening to the commotion for probably an hour now. There's such a roaring and howling up there that it makes one quite uneasy, outside in the pitch-black night. And yet it's so still, so anxious down here. Not a breath of air stirs, and yet it rustles heavily through the leaves now and then, really as if the old trees themselves were shaking with secret dread." Gertrude folded her hands anxiously and spoke. "That surely means another severe thunderstorm. If only it doesn't catch him on the way." She had hardly finished speaking when a strong knocking was heard at the outer door. "That's him," she cried. "I know the knock." Heinrich hurried out. Gertrude staggered to the window. She heard her husband's voice speaking with the young man. The latter returned towards the house, slung his rifle and hunting bag over his shoulder, and then hastily left the yard. Wilbrand locked and bolted the door behind him. Gertrude trembled so violently that she had to sit down. Elizabeth stood beside her and took her hand. The door flew wide open. Wilbrand appeared on the threshold, hair and clothes in wild disarray, all his features distorted and disfigured. Blood flowed from 2 scratches on his forehead and cheek down his face without him seeming to notice, completing the ghastliness of his appearance. Gertrude covered her face with both hands, wailing loudly. "Now, wife," began Wilbrand in a dull, hoarse voice, yet without raising his eyes, "what are you carrying on about? Be quiet. I cannot stand the moaning and howling. Be still. Someone might hear, escape suspicion." He stepped into the room and slammed the door shut. His steps were uncertain and staggering. He leaned his rifle in the corner, the hunting knife he kept at his side. "I cannot stand it," he began anew, pacing up and down. "I want to put an end to it. Cannot stand the gloomy faces. Away with them. It must be merry. By the devil, I want to be merry. I want. Who has anything against it? Who? I have endured it for 19 years. Now it's over. I will not die on the gallows for your sake." He threw himself into the armchair and propped his forehead in his hand. After a while, he continued full of grimness. "Yes, if the magistrate's son had become your husband, what does it matter? She would have seen friendlier faces. She loved him, me, they only had because the father wanted it, perhaps out of pity. But she hasn't forgotten him. I know it well. I have often had to feel the pity. Woe to you that you remind me of it now. Woe, I have endured it for 19 years. Today it ends. Today is your death." He jumped up and approached the table beside which Gertrude sat. She screamed and jumped likewise from her chair. Elizabeth stepped protectively before her. But Wilbrand suddenly stopped and looked at his right hand, which had become covered in blood. Then he stepped to the table and slowly drew his fingers across it so that 4 bloody streaks were visible on it. "There," he cried. "There it is written, 4 letters, quite right, 4 bloody letters. Can you read it? Thus they are written in heaven, or in hell, I don't know, but no human hand can erase them. I must, it is written. And who is to blame then? Wasn't it precisely the gloomy faces and the hidden pity that drove me from the house? Without them, I wouldn't have drunk. Without them, I wouldn't have gambled. Without them, I wouldn't have become a thief. Mary, Mary, now it goes ever onward. Pay close attention. I want to tell you something. The 1,500 thalers I was supposed to bring the count for the wood. Mark well, they are gambled away, lost. I must die on the gallows, without mercy. Who should save me? Now look. I have betrothed myself to the water-fay in the Black Lake. Your ring I have thrown down there. She will save me from disgrace. But you, You must. Can you still not read? There it stands written. At what price? Blood, blood, murder, 4 letters. Read it. It is your judgment. You must die. His voice had become loud and gruesome with the last words. His eyes rolled. He drew the hunting knife from its sheath, sprang to the door, and locked it. Gertrude fell to her knees and stretched her arms pleadingly towards him. Wilbrand, Wilbrand, she screamed, trembling with a choked voice. What are you going to do? Just then, a terrible roaring arose outside. The storm raged through the forest, the thunder crashed, and in between, a dreadful rushing broke forth from the mountains, coming closer with every moment. Wilbrand stood listening. She comes, he cried. The flood buries the deed and washes the blood from my hands. A gust of wind struck the window and threw open one wing. The storm howled through the opening. At the same time, a dark body was driven inside and fell in the middle of the room. Gertrude collapsed unconscious with a scream. Hiss, cried Wilbrand. Now comes the music, now come the guests, now it's time to dance. It was a large owl that the raging storm had thrown in. It rose, hissing and clattering, and circled, seeking an escape, with heavy flight around Wilbrand's head. Hiss on, he continued. This way it's merry. Hiss, the whole world begins to spin. That's right. Now courage will also come into the cowardly limbs. Forward, hunter, haven't you shed blood well enough in your life? Blood is blood, nothing more. Forward, just go. It's getting dark before my eyes. Just go, play bravely. Now the step counts. Staggering with the swung blade towards Gertrude. Elizabeth, who until now had only been occupied with her mother, now sprang up. She quickly grasped a small crucifix standing on the mantelpiece and stepped resolutely in her father's path. Stop, she cried with a strong voice, holding the crucifix towards him. Stop, in the name of the crucified, in the name of your Savior, stop. Wilbrand stared at her. Do you have the courage? She continued. In the sight of your Redeemer, will you repay his blood, which he shed for you, with the innocent blood of yours? Depart from him. Cursed power of hell, your victor has come over you. In his name I curse you. In his name I command you, desist from this one whom you ensnare. Release him from your bonds. And if a bloody sacrifice must be made to save him, here it is. It is I, take me. She fell to her knees. Here I am, Father, save yourself. Take me and let Mother live. Strike. From your hands, death does not pain me. These last words Gertrude heard as she regained consciousness and just opened her eyes. She saw her daughter lying at Wilbrand's feet. She saw him, frozen in his last movement, still standing before her with the swung blade as if about to deliver the death blow. In terrible fear, she quickly pulled herself up and screamed, falling to her knees beside Elizabeth and baring her breast. Here, you murderer, into this breast. My child you shall not have. Me you want, only me. Strike, gladly I die for my child. But now, as Wilbrand saw mother and daughter thus lying before him, each ready to joyfully go to death for the other, the sight of such love suddenly dissolved the hostile madness that ensnared him. The memory overcame him of how once a third had been in this bond of love. The rigid heart broke in unspeakable melancholy. From his hand slipped the blade. He rushed towards them, lifted both simultaneously from the ground with strong arms, and wanted, full of hot longing, to draw them to his breast. But as his eyes met theirs, the terrible consciousness of his guilt overcame him again. The features, once so beloved and familiar, seemed alien, yes, fearsome to him. He could not bear their sight. No, no, he cried painfully. I no longer belong to you, and sank at their feet, embracing their knees, sobbing loudly. At this moment precisely, the thunderstorm, which had been silent for a short time, returned with doubled force, throwing everything before it down. Torrents of rain crashed down. Without interruption, lightning followed lightning. It was as if the sky were dissolving into fire and water to fall upon the trembling earth. Gruesomely howled the storm. The whole house seemed to shake. The beams creaked, the doors sprang open, and the terrible rushing, which had been heard earlier, now seemed very close outside the windows. That is the wall of water, cried Elizabeth. It's coming. It's crashing in. She sprang to the window. Just then the outer courtyard wall collapsed before the surging flood. In the light of the lightning, she saw the white foaming crests of the waves rolling towards the house. Upstairs, she screamed, grasped her father's and mother's hands and pulled them with her out the door. The water was already at their heels. Gushing and swirling, it also came towards them from the other side. They managed to reach the stairs leading to the upper floor. But even here was no safety for long. The flood rose with terrifying speed. Already they heard the water rushing again right under the window. Elizabeth urged them to the last refuge under the roof. "What good is it?" cried Wilbrand. "It will reach us there too. She won't let her prey escape." Elizabeth, however, pulled him by force up the stairs. The mother followed. The storm seemed to subside. The thunderstorm rolled off into the plain, but the water still rose. They heard it breaking one window after another below them. Wilbrand ran back and forth despairingly, beating his fist against his chest and forehead. "So they must still die, because of me," he cried. Gertrude wrung her hands, looking anxiously up to heaven. Elizabeth looked first at her, then through the dormer windows, and comforted them in between, saying the house was firmly and strongly built and could probably resist for a long time yet. Day must break soon, and then help would surely come. Indeed, soon after, a bright streak dawned in the east on the edge of the sky. Elizabeth joyfully pointed it out to her mother, and now looked attentively over the surging and swirling surface towards the mountains, which were becoming ever clearer, to see if rescue might not yet appear.